Hi, I'm Gaynalyn Condi, excited to be back with you discussing one of our recent General Conference talks. Full disclosure, when I've recorded these videos in the past, I was serving as a Relief Society instructor, and I am currently in the Valiant Activities, previously known as Activity Days, calling right now. So I'm not teaching in this capacity, but I love discussing General Conference talks on my own platform. We are studying one a week, and I love this deep dive on one of my favorite talks from the most recent General Conference from Sister Dennis, cheering each other on. So for those of you that have found me on this platform and reached out for flyers, that I am that's my pattern for teaching. I want you to know there will be a flyer. This is the flyer. It should be in the show notes in a PDF. And we're going to go through it. I really love providing questions and quotes so that there's a jumping off point. Sometimes I do more than 4 or 5. And what I have decided on this one is if you're teaching this talk, you are really hoping to create vulnerability and connection. And that only happens when there's space. When the teacher has so much on their agenda of trying to get through for the lesson, we don't always leave a lot of space for sharing. And this talk for me can really help if you are dealing with struggles with belonging or connection in your wards. If you have mental health needs, which is every word I know in the church. And so I wanted to only provide 4 questions. You could add additional questions. The other thing, if you're new to my style of teaching, that is that paper handout. I'm not trying to throw shade on any of the PowerPoint teachers out there because I know technology can be amazing, but I love a good paper handout because I often, every time I taught, I had one, and I would leave it on the chair or a table in the hallway so the sisters and even the brothers, if they wanted, that are serving in primary young men, young women's, could grab one of those handouts. The other thing is I always invite those attending my class to take one to who they minister to. So I'm a fan of paper and I love a good paper handout. So today we're going to be talking about Sister Dennis cheering each other on. I love at the beginning of this talk, she starts by telling a story of 100-year-old Orville Rogers.
Recently, I read of an experience that touched me deeply. It took place at the USA Masters Track and Field National Championship, a competition for seniors. One of the participants in the 1,500-meter event was 100-year-old Orville Rogers. The author writes, "When the starter pistol fired, the runners took off, with Orville settling immediately into last place, where he remained alone for the entire race, shuffling along very slowly. When the last runner besides Orville finished, Orville still had 2.5 laps to go. Nearly 3,000 spectators sat watching him slowly make his way around the track, completely, silently, and uncomfortably alone. But when he began his final lap, the crowd rose to their feet, cheering and applauding. By the time he hit the home stretch, the crowd was roaring. With the cheering encouragement of thousands of spectators, Orville called on his last reserves of energy. The crowd erupted with delight as he crossed the finish line and was embraced by his competitors. Orville humbly and gratefully waved to the crowd and walked off the track with his new friends. This was Orville's 5th race of the competition, and in each of the other events he had also taken last place. Some might have been tempted to judge Orville, thinking that he shouldn't have even competed at his age, that he didn't belong on the track because he greatly prolonged his events for everyone else. But even though he always finished last, Orville broke 5 world records that day. No one watching him race would have believed that possible, but neither the spectators nor his competitors were the judges. Orville didn't break any rules, and the officials didn't lower any standards. He ran the same race and fulfilled the same requirements as all the other competitors. But his degree of difficulty, in this case his age and limited physical capacity, was factored in by placing him in the 100 plus age division. And in that division, he broke 5 world records. Just as it took Orville great courage to step out on that track each time, it also takes great courage for some of our sisters and brothers to step into the arena of life every day.
I love this. I love sharing when there's a story like this that kind of just starts a talk and opens up the heart. I love using technology to like have the speakers share that story. On the handout, you'll see that I made sure, let me see. I made sure that you could see here that there's a little intro here of that story. And so it's a good jogging of memory. You know, we watch conference talks over that weekend wearing our cozy clothes, which is why I'm wearing my cozy clothes today. And then it kind of gets jumbled. And so I think when we lead out with, remember that was the talk where this story was of the 100-year-old runner that broke the world record. And then all of a sudden you kind of remember context. So the first question I want to talk about is, have you had times where attending church is hard? And we could see where Sister Dennis was about to jump into that, about how doing life can be difficult. If you follow me, you know I love the intersection between mental health and faith. And this talk, the reason I wanted to teach about teaching it is because it is plump full of opportunities for that intersection conversation. And this is one of those times. So the question I pose is, have you had times where attending church is hard? I think if any of us over a certain age, probably the answer to that question is yes, and it could be for various reasons. And so I share with you on this handout her quotes. Our congregations and families can be gathering places where we cheer each other on, but attending church can be hard for some people for various reasons. Put yourself in that person's place and treat them the way you would want to be treated if you were in their shoes. I would just pose here, when you pause and ask this question, you, depending on what kind of teacher, what kind of ward, what kind of community vulnerability you have built over time, you may have to pause here. This would be a great time if you go through a long period of minutes that can feel like hours of silence to share a time yourself as the teacher where you struggled. And I love that this is open-ended. It could be lots of reasons. It could be, you know, struggling with mental health, physical health, loneliness, issues with our families, unemployment, faith questions. There's so many things that could be a jumping off point in this part of the talk. Okay. The next question that I wanted to share is right here. How have you connected with people of other faiths? She goes on to talk about how Christ-like treatment of others goes beyond our families and our congregations, but it includes people of other faiths, countries, cultures, and political persuasions. Christ-like love and care are higher and holier. The pure love of Christ is charity. His is not a gospel checklist. It's a gospel of becoming as he is and loving as he does. I also work on interfaith platform on social media, and it's called All Faith Keepers. And because of that, I often will visit other congregations and other faiths or share content about other faiths, holidays, beliefs. The joy of my childhood was that I grew up in a very diverse culture, community, where I was one of the token members of my faith. There weren't a lot of members of our church. There were a lot of people in my friend group of various faiths, and I grew up going to other faiths. What a great opportunity, especially given the high visibility of members of the church on reality television shows, on social media right now, in the news, to stop and pause for your congregation and your class to have a conversation about how are we helping and including community building with other faiths. And I know, especially outside of Utah, I live in Utah, it can be assumed that we're all one. There is a predominant faith here, obviously, but there is diversity of faiths even in Utah. But especially if you are teaching in a congregation outside of Utah, I know some of the community interfaith leaders of our faith are on councils, area councils, where there is very specific planning to create connection and community. And this would be a great time in this lesson to stop and just like open it up for where can we do better about creating those connections in our communities with people that feel different than us, that have different culture than us, different faith than us. I love having interfaith conversations. I love having interfaith with an education lens. That's really what I think. It's not about converting, it's about better understanding. The next question is the one moment in the talk where I was like, this is the talk I want to teach about teaching. Sister Dennis is powerful, humble, and bold. I've gotten to know her personally over the last few years, and she is all of that. And she goes on, it's going to make me emotional. I'm going to read directly what her words are. When I was in my late 20s, I went through a period of deep depression. This is for question number 2 right here. She goes on to say, and during that time, it was as if the reality of God that existed was suddenly gone. I can't fully explain the feeling other than to say I felt completely lost. From the time I was a young child, I'd always known that my Father in heaven was there and that I could talk to him. But during this time, I no longer knew if there was a God. Let's pause right here. That is a profound statement. My 21-year-old daughter was watching this talk with us live. She's in college and she lives outside our home. And we both turned to each other and said, we don't remember a time where a general leader has admitted, especially in connection with mental health needs, that the reality of God was in question. What a powerful teaching opportunity. Sister Dennis goes on to say, I'd never experienced anything like that before in my life, and it felt like my whole foundation was crumbling, and as a result, it was hard for me to attend church. I went, but it was partly because I was afraid of being labeled inactive or less faithful, and I was afraid of becoming someone's assigned project. What I really needed during that time was to feel genuine love, understanding, and support from those around me, not judgment. Wow. Like if you're teaching this talk and this is where you spend the rest of your lesson on, it's a win. The question I pose, and you can reframe this, is how has mental health affected how you experience God and faith? It wasn't that God wasn't real. It wasn't that Sister Dennis didn't have faith, but she had such a deep depression that it becomes what I like to teach when I teach mental health and faith is it's like a screen that's very thick. And those little holes in the screen, it's hard to get the faith and the love through the screen. And so you can have people around you testifying, witnessing, serving you, and you may not be experiencing it. And so this is a beautiful and vulnerable time in the lesson to pause and discuss mental health and how it affects how we experience God and faith. We have no idea what may come from a discussion like this. You have no idea what it took for someone to come to your class that day in Elders Quorum and Relief Society. And it may be the validation and vulnerable moment that helps them feel seen. Like Sister Dennis said, she needed love, understanding, and support, not judgment. And your lesson, this question, could be exactly that moment. Okay, the final question I have is, how have you been encouraged or encouraged by others to not lose hope? That question isn't worded great. How have you been encouraged or encouraged by? What I meant to say there is, how have you been encouraged or how have you encouraged others to not lose hope? Sister Dennis said, please don't lose hope. Please keep going. Please stay. You do belong. The Lord needs you and we need you, especially when it comes to chronic mental health struggles. The lie, especially when it comes to suicidal ideation, is that we would be better without you. I love that Sister Dennis unequivocally says, please don't lose hope. We need you. And the Lord needs you. And she goes on to say, it is a basic human need for all of us to feel a sense of belonging, to feel that we are wanted and needed, and that our lives have purpose, meaning, no matter our circumstances or limitations. So this is also a great time. I know in wards I've been in where there are cliques that develop and people maybe struggle to feel a sense of belonging. It is crucial to talk about that no one in a ward is expected to be best friends with everyone. But to be a ward family means we can do so much to encourage belonging, encourage connection. And how can we do that? And if you as a teacher can hold space for an honest conversation about that, and brainstorm as a ward family how we can show encouragement to one another, how we can foster hope. I think what a better use of our time on a Sunday than to gather and have a conversation like this. I hope this handout, this discussion, this pattern for teaching is helpful for you. Please let me know. Many of you reach out to me privately after hearing this video, and you're about to teach your own lesson. I love to pray for you and encourage you from the sidelines in your own teaching process. Thank you for your service, and be well.